Talk to me about organs. Organs is a weird one, right? Because I think seed oil free mayonnaise people can get behind, but as soon as you start talking about organs to anybody, they get a little bit turned off. Now, you guys do some organs, but you use ancient breed of Icelandic lamb. That sounds super
Mm.
cool. Tell me about the importance of that for you. Like, why the Icelandic lamb?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, organs are one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. But many people, particularly like within our modern culture, are so squeamish when it comes to consuming organs. Um, so for us, it was like, how can we actually put this into a format that is palatable, it's convenient, it's easy for obviously consumers to adopt. Obviously, what the guys over at Heart and Soul do is fantastic. We're doing a similar thing here in the UK. And for us, it was about how can we source the organs from the most purest of places. And for us, it was the Icelandic sheep. They literally live a wild roaming kind of the wildest of diets, the wildest of lifestyles possible. So they're kind of let out with the mums. They go out into the mountains. They live wild for about a year, and then are brought down in October time on horseback by like the local villages. So it's a fantastic kind of prestigious event.
It's called Ratir. Ratir?
Yeah, the Ratir, yeah.
Yeah. I'm fascinated
Amy and
by
I actually went
Iceland.
over there, Amy and I went over there in October to actually help with that process. So it's quite a ritual, and it's pretty eye opening.
Yeah, and another nod to the way it's always been done. You know, these Icelandic lamb roaming the mountains, rugged. Iceland itself is just a crazy place. It's like volcanic and mysterious, and the people from there are just like, I love them, the gangsters. And you're doing that on horseback. It's like, yeah, this is what it's all about. It's the remembering, right, and getting closer to our food and honoring these ancestral lineages and the wisdom that has been lost. Talk to me about the landscape of like UK agriculture as a whole. Something we talk about a lot here, and something that's kind of like been memed into existence through people that have experienced what the food is like here, and then say going on vacation to Europe and eating similar foods that would wreck them here. It doesn't wreck them quite as much there. And there's some arguments to be made that America's really leading the way in the use of herbicides, pesticides, rodenticides, etc. And they're spraying thousands of pounds of glyphosate. Maybe there's some tighter regulations on some of that stuff in the EU. But I remember growing up in England. I remember like the green, lush rolling hills. I remember seeing cows out on pasture. Has it been, because obviously you source very good ingredients, like you said, free-range egg yolks for the mayonnaise and grass-fed beef, and I want to talk about the collagen and all of that stuff. How much as the farming system or the agriculture system, like, is it more left in its natural state? Is it naturally regenerative? How much of the caged animal feeding operation and the factory farm is taken over in the UK too? Do you have a read on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think like ruminants, beef, so cattle, lamb, deer, for instance, in the UK is like really good. Like we live in a climate where it's conducive to have animals out on pasture. But when you get down to like chicken farming, pork farming, it's still not very desirable. But I think you guys in the US, it's on steroids in terms of how concentrated those operations are. I think the EU and the UK, for instance, we don't inject cattle with hormones, and there's no like routine antibiotics, even in like the most kind of basic of the basic beef here in the UK and in the EU. So our restrictions are far tighter. And I think when the use of like pesticides, herbicides, etc., and glyphosate is a lot less here in the EU and UK. So I think there are some key differences. Like I said, you guys lead the way in terms of innovation, quote unquote, when it comes to all these different chemicals. And yeah, there was a time when I was like, you must consume grass-fed, grass-finished beef and nothing else. But that almost becomes out of the realms of possibility. And then it begs the questions in like consumers' mind. Well, can I not have the 20% fat mince that's in the supermarket? That's all I can afford. It's like, no, absolutely have that. So I've spent quite a lot of time personally exploring things like abattoirs here in the UK. And back in January, I went to the UK's biggest independent abattoir, who exclusively supplied the beef to one of the UK supermarkets. Confidentially, I can't say who it is. but I was blown away by the operation and how ethical it was, how streamlined it was, how empathetic it was to the cattle. So, like for instance, they played classical music within the holding pen where the beef were, where the cows were. There was a particular like line of sight and how the cattle move through from the holding pen to the kill box, for instance, even down to how the ground was and how it was. Everything was done to keep the stress low in the animal. So I think, we've got a fantastic system here in the UK, and I think that needs to be championed more, because I think people hear about the horror stories. You see the likes of the vegan propaganda movies, and they'll always pick out the extreme example and say, look, this is how it is. And it's like, no, guys, it's not how it is. But we've seen a lot of the kind of the plant-based brands here in the UK that have got a huge amount of funding have been pushing those extreme messages. So then the lay consumer thinks that's what it's like. So I think one of my life missions beyond hunter and gather is going to be championing animal-based agriculture and the wonderful things that farmers do, and how great, how nutrient dense foods are for people.
It's super important, man. And I liked your point as well about we obviously push as much as possible, support the farmers that are doing it right. Regenerative agriculture is really important because the health of our soils is the health of our future, and farmers hold our life essentially in their hands, because if the food runs out, it's not going to end well. And at the same time, you have to get, it's give and take, because you can't be so health elitist that it's only grass-fed and finished when the economy and the climate for people right now, monetary wise, is really challenging. And how do you square that circle of like, hey, just eat beef, even if it's coming from a feedlot, because it's still really nutrient dense. It isn't as good for the animals. It isn't as good for the soils of the planets. We are using a lot of synthetic inputs there. And I think more conversations like this, and ultimately over time, supply creates demand, right? Or demand creates supply, rather, that if we do continue to vote with our dollar in the right places, that these systems will change. But I'm very happy to hear that you actually went to one of these places and was pleasantly surprised, because you're right, the emotive footage that is used to show what goes on in these feedlot operations is always, it's heartbreaking. I feel the heartbreak when I watch it. I don't want to support those systems. I feel guilty. I see why people want to remove themselves from that system entirely. But the cherry picking, and it's not all like that, right? And if you can take some control back of your own food and how you choose to support it, whether that's farmers markets going directly to the consumer, or just knowing that you're putting your money in the right place, the people that's doing it right, that life supports life and life requires death, and it's a kind of an uncomfortable truth of our life. But if we can do it in the right way, in the ethical way as much as possible, so we can have our highest level of health, so we can go about enacting change in the world, then that's what it's all about. So very pleasantly surprised to hear that, and go into one of the bigger ones in the UK, because I have a feeling that if you went to one of the biggest beef suppliers in the US, I don't think they're playing classical music to the cows and really thinking about keeping stress levels low. My intuition tells me that's probably not what's happening. It seems like it's just a big machine, which is why it is really important to think about where you're getting that stuff from. Please continue, yeah.
But to add to that, here in the UK, if you look at the buying habits of consumers, they choose to buy chicken and pork, which doesn't have a great... The standard chicken and pork isn't great, but there's been so much propaganda that red meat and beef is bad for us, that the consumer appetite is just not totally gone away. But when you say to someone, "Hey, I'm having like beef for lunch," like in the office here at Hunter and Gather, everyone has beef, but they'll join the company and they'll be like, "But isn't that red meat bad for you?" It's like, no, guys, and here's why. That's what I want to add.
Yeah. I mean, worldwide, what's really interesting is if you look at health trends, they've been getting worse since the 30s, but they really kind of exponentially exploded in terms of ill health outcomes, diabetes, chronic disease, everything hockey sticks from around the 50s and 60s, and it's not really slowing down at all. It's interesting when you look at worldwide beef consumption over that time, because it's actually coming down, and animal fat consumption is coming down, but what is on the rise is chicken and pork consumption. It's the same thing here too. And I think, that's obviously a smaller animal, and if they build these systems, it can be more profitable. But really, to pin the tail of blame on the beef and the red meat, it doesn't really make sense, because we're actually eating less red meat than we have in the past, but we're eating significantly more chicken and pork. And these animals, their facilities are terrible. And I get it. I have a little homestead. I raise chickens. It is not cost effective to do chickens, regeneratively raised, corn and soy-free feed, and out foraging on bugs. And if you actually buy one of those, like truly free-range chicken here in the US, you're probably looking at 25, $30 a bird. Whereas you can go to the store and, at the right time and place, you could probably get a bird for $7 or $8 for a whole chicken. So it's a broken food system. It's broken incentives. And again, this fear mongering around saturated fat and cholesterol has really forced the consumer to consume less beef, and the health outcomes aren't matching that. In the plant-based future of the world, that's going to save us. Well, when? Because already about 70% of our daily calories are coming from plant-based foods. Already we've replaced the bulk of the butter and the tallow and all of those things for margarines and seed oils. So in theory, if this is going to save us, it should have been working already. Yet in reality, we're getting sicker, we're getting fatter, our kids are getting fatter, we're having more diseases and developmental delays. So it quite clearly isn't working as far as I can see it. And I think getting more beef back on the plate is very, very important. And I'm the same. I eat beef every single day, sometimes twice a day. And people just think at any moment you're going to keel over from clogged arteries, or your bum hole is going to fall out because of colon cancer. Meanwhile, my health just keeps improving. So it's like the upside down world sometimes.
Oh yes, the clown world. It's almost, if it wasn't so bad, it would be funny, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tragically comedic at times.